What are the challenges with green energy? Does the industry have an image problem? What role does hydrogen play in a cleaner tomorrow? Welcome to The Challenge with Green Energy, the podcast tackling the tough questions with the green energy revolution. I'm your host, Lizzie Simon, and in each episode, we will be speaking to experts, leaders, and key voices in the industry to uncover the challenges, breakthroughs, and image issues, and the untold stories that are powering a cleaner, brighter tomorrow. So, what is the challenge with green energy? Let's find out. So in this episode, I'm going to be speaking to Amer Gaffar. So Amer is the director of the Manchester Fuel Cell Innovation Centre at Manchester Metropolitan University and a sustainability professional with more than 23 years experience within the environmental sector. So 10 years ago, Amer founded the Greater Manchester Hydrogen Partnership to develop and build networks of SME, industry, researchers and public sector stakeholders integral to the work of the centre today. He's also authored the now formally adopted Greater Manchester Hydrogen Fuel Cell Strategy, alongside working with a number of stakeholders with the UK government to establish key deliverables for the UK hydrogen strategy ambitions. And very recently, Amer has joined Hydrogen Safe as a strategic advisor, where he's responsible for strategy development and supporting technical papers, thought leadership articles, and providing insight to be used in developing new partnerships and programs for the business. So thank you so much for your time, Amer. I know you're a very busy man. How is your week going?
Busy. We'll start with that. So, it's an absolute pleasure for me to be here. And I think, just to talk about some of, when you hear back what, you were saying in terms of sort of career aspect, one thing I will start with that, there's a lot that has been achieved in Greater Manchester and the UK on the hydrogen agenda. But again, that only happens through sort of true collaborations with multiple different partners. And I think there's a real ambition that hydrogen is going to play a key role as we drive towards net zero, and it's for us to make sure that it actually does.
Absolutely. So obviously, as you've just said, and as your introduction demonstrated, you have done a lot in increasing that awareness of the hydrogen industry, not only on a regional scale within Greater Manchester, but also on a national one as well. So I am really looking forward to learning a little bit more about this. But before we get into that, I think it would be brilliant to understand how your career has evolved into what it is today. I have heard a few names thrown around for you. I've heard Mr. Hydrogen. I've also heard the hydrogen guru. So yeah, it would be brilliant to kind of understand how you've got to this stage in your career.
I suppose it comes from my interest in sustainability, which, that's really what takes me back sort of 23 odd years. And I got into sustainability completely by accident. So when I first graduated, my sort of evolution into sort of working life was working in the tech sector, which very soon I realized that not that it wasn't for me, but it was a very strange sector to be in at that time, because it's when the dot-com bubble was being burst and there was lots of companies just kind of reevaluating their sort of ambitions around technology as it stood back then. And then I kind of got involved in sustainability purely by accident, because I ended up doing a contract for a council and a housing association, which kind of got me interested in the world of sustainability. But it brought in my sort of tech expertise, which was how do we capture people's data in terms of the assets that they lived in terms of their homes, to make them better and more energy efficient. So it kind of started with that, and it really was for a number of years a role which I enjoyed, but I didn't really fundamentally understand or believe in sustainability as much as I do. So if you fast track 23 years, I think it was the idea of, yes, we are installing all of this technology, whether it's LED lighting or solar PV or wind turbines, a range of technology. And everything I was doing was really about, would that technology effectively pay back for the client? Because it had to. Most things when new buildings are created or new infrastructure was developed, one of the first things that tended to get value engineered out was the sustainability measures. So it was a case of making sure that they were put back in, but making sure that they also had a payback period. And then 12 years ago, I came to Manchester Metropolitan University, basically in that guise, where I was brought in to develop ambitions around the estate, and that was installing sort of the latest tech in the new development buildings that were taking place, looking at existing buildings and seeing where we could make those kilowatt hour savings. And every one of those, again, had to have a payback period. And then I tried to be really clever. And I laugh at that point because I tried to install a hydrogen fuel cell into one of the campus buildings as part of the sustainability ambitions. And we went quite far in the sense of we looked at a couple of site options within the university estate. We kind of agreed on a site. We then went to feasibility. And then, post feasibility, it became very, very clear, very, very quickly that this was a very expensive technology. And there was only a few companies in the world that could deliver the type of asset that we needed. So we needed a combined heat and power unit, which was going to provide lots of electricity, lots of heat for that campus, that specific campus. But the astronomical figure I can give you was an astronomical figure in terms of the capital expenditure around that. But what it did do is it gave me an introduction into the world of hydrogen, and then I met some fantastic and amazing academics who I still work with to this day, who were surface engineers. They were electrochemists, they were smart grid specialists. There was lots of academic research being done which could lend itself to developing hydrogen and fuel cell projects specifically. So I met those, amazing, wonderful people. And then I met colleagues within Greater Manchester Combined Authority, and we kind of had a collective conversation saying, wouldn't it be good if we could start a number of different hydrogen projects? So let's set up a partnership. And that partnership really had 4 key focus areas. Let's look at energy, let's look at transport, and critically, as a university leading a partnership like that, let's look at research and the opportunity to create the right skills alongside. So we started that partnership, and then we were able to place the requirement of a innovation centre that would support a supply chain of businesses that could start developing these technologies. Because remember, when I looked at this market and I looked at it from a perspective of I was trying to install technology which not many companies were able to provide or deploy. So you needed to increase that supply chain. I won't say quite quickly, but you needed to increase it because there was a growing global interest in this technology, and you had to kind of foresee that is hydrogen and fuel cell technology going to become part of the energy transition eventually. And now we're in a position where we have dedicated roadmaps, we have dedicated strategies that have been not just developed by the UK government, but by 52, 53 other governments across the world. There's 53 roadmaps that exist. So that sort of 10-year period developing the hydrogen partnership has evolved into creating a £4.1 million innovation centre which supports a supply chain of over 150 different businesses. Those businesses make components, they make compressors, they make materials. That is then packed with lots of world-leading academic capability who support those businesses in developing their product or making sure that we work on the materials challenges associated with this sort of sector. And then you kind of really have to address where are the challenges, because there's lots of technology challenges, there's lots of investment challenges, but you can start looking at why hydrogen in the first place. So if all of these companies are suddenly engaged and interested in developing this technology, what's the end game? Why are they doing it? So we all know that as we move our ambitions around sustainability, they have now sort of been driven more by net zero policies and net zero strategies. So 20 years ago, sustainability was a thing, and sustainability thing is still a thing, very, very well-known thing today. But over the last 10 years, or probably the last 5 years in the main, we're hearing more and more references to net zero. But then it's ensuring that we know and fully understand the challenges associated with trying to deliver net zero. And those challenges are huge. Hydrogen's a very small part of a net zero society, but it is a complete and integral part of it. And then it was really a case of what can we do around the skills ambitions alongside, because it's not just about these businesses and their supply chain, because again a lot of the skills that we needed to create were held in some of those businesses, and we needed to ensure that they were able to share those skills. So alongside that innovation centre, we built a programme of hydrogen education, and that was really targeted at school children, and that was a British Council funded project, and it was developed with partners in France, Italy, Belgium, Romania, Greece. The idea behind it was really that we have lots of innovation facilities being developed across the world, but we needed to ensure that hydrogen was taught more as a topic as opposed to an exam question in physics or chemistry. So the idea was, let's teach people or children from the ages of, say, 13 through to sort of just before they go to college around the applications of hydrogen, the storage opportunities around hydrogen, about fuel cell technology. And that worked really well in the sense that it was a free resource which lots of schools used, because what it also did, and it also did, which is critical even today, and even more so critical today, it allowed us to teach teachers about hydrogen as opposed to them just kind of learning about it in textbook form. So we, through gamification, through pedagogy, we developed a series of resources. And then I suppose it kind of just turned into, how can we continue to support businesses and how can we support the education market? So for other sort of ambitions we've developed, some of those have really accelerated since the evolution of a dedicated hydrogen fuel cell strategy. So I've had the pleasure of being involved with multiple groups within the Department of Net Zero and Security. I've sat and worked with colleagues in the Combined Authority on energy ambitions in general, and then tried to find a role for hydrogen. And that was the whole point in ensuring that if we have a national plan around hydrogen, I'm a very, very proud Mancunian. This is where I went to school, this is where I went to college, I left when I went to university, and then I came back. And I think there is real value, given the fact that we'd achieved so much through that partnership, that there was real value in creating a policy that almost placed a marker in and around the Greater Manchester sort of community that we still want to deploy a lot of hydrogen projects. And that started with a core vision of what is integral to that vision. We need infrastructure. So, we've got the innovation facility, we're supporting businesses, we've got a level of education program, which is really about schools. But we needed to ensure that, for people to really, really embrace this technology and the ambition around hydrogen, that we needed a core infrastructure project. And then, we met in early 2021 with the Combined Authority, a fantastic organisation called Carlton Power. Now, Carlton Power are the lead developer of the Trafford Green Hydrogen Project. Now, that was a vision that we had, that we needed a big focal project around hydrogen production, which people could then start not just understanding it more, but equally they would start off taking that hydrogen, which would then displace natural gas that lots of industry uses on a daily basis, which is astronomical in emission terms. And this is alongside recognizing that hydrogen is not our only solution to getting to net zero in Greater Manchester. And again, being in Greater Manchester really helps, in my belief. I might have mentioned this before, but I'm a very proud Mancunian. But B, because it has the most ambitious target of getting to net zero across the UK, if not across Europe, if not across the world, or because we want to get to net zero by 2038. Now, the university I work for has effectively the same target. And it's well recognised that through local area energy planning, you can define a role for technologies like hydrogen through creating dedicated strategies for a region, allow you to look at this through a regional lens, but it's a national ambition. So you're basically putting a marker into a national roadmap that says, we're Greater Manchester, we are ready to embrace hydrogen in multiple different ways. We want to innovate in it because we've got fantastic academic institutions that will help you develop your product. We want to deploy it because we've got fantastic organisations, again, like Carlton, who are looking to deploy this technology so people can start off taking it. And again, going back to that Carlton project, that was instrumental in striving forward, a region with about 2.8 million people, in understanding the technology a lot better, because it almost becomes something physical, even though it's still, yet to be constructed, and construction is likely to start later this year. But what it was what do you need to make a project like that work? Well, you need someone who understands gas. So Cadent were absolutely critical to that project. So they became a project partner. You need somebody who understands the technology. So, the university and the innovation centre became a partner in that project. You need somebody with a policy ambition around how do we get to net zero by 2038? Well, it's obvious answer, it's the Combined Authority. Then you needed to ensure you had the organisation like Electricity North West on board, because critical to many urban hydrogen production projects will be the electrical grid. So we need to ensure that people who own and operate the grid, A, can support projects like this, but B, they need to increase their understanding of how to sort of create projects like this. And then you've got the local council effectively where that project's going to live, and that's Trafford Council. So Trafford Council have been very, very supportive of this project. But aside of the innovation ambitions, aside of the deployment, none of this works. And I mean, from literally day one, none of this works until you have the right people to deliver it. And those people are not just needed when we have lots of infrastructure to service. They're needed from the very point where we start looking at engineering design of these projects, or they're needed at the point of how do you take a project with a hydrogen ambition through to financial investment decision. That's a critical sort of point that people often overlook, because none of what we're trying to achieve, whether it's the investment, whether it's the opportunity around skills, the opportunity around infrastructure, or the opportunity around innovation, works without investment. And we need to ensure that that is sort of thought about at the very outset of when we deploy any new technology, irrespective of whether we're talking about hydrogen or electrification or heat pump technology. So the partnership, and again, I'll take it back to that partnership, has been completely critical in paving the way. And yes, I have those, wonderful names like Mr. Hydrogen and Hydrogen, whatever we want to call me. It might be something else tomorrow, but I think it's because I had a passion that this technology would get us some of the way where we needed to get to. And along that journey has made me work with academics, with policymakers, with children, children who, when you talk to them about hydrogen and then all of a sudden you reference the very fact that hydrogen might play a future role in F1, their eyes light up. Or hydrogen, will play a role in decarbonising, some of the biggest challenges we face for our heavy industries. So, the fact that electrification will offer a brilliant pathway for many of our challenges around getting to net zero, but we can't electrify everything. We're talking about finding a role for something like hydrogen when we're talking about cement manufacturing, bottle manufacturing, steel manufacturing, those heavy industries which need and actually create so many emissions that it's a challenge that we needed to address years ago. But why now? Well, I think the why now is because we're now starting to focus on net zero. We're now starting to focus and becoming more serious about sustainability. I suppose even as we evolve as people, if you look at the way, when I went to school, there was no sort of education around sustainability taught. When I went to college, the same thing happened. Then again, I'm quite old, so we will come back to that. But the very fact that the Department for Education are now thinking about delivering sustainability education is phenomenal. The very fact that organisations like Hydrogen Safe exist to train the next generation of these engineers that were going to be critical. The fact that universities are looking at uplifting their courses to be suitable for net zero, or developing specialist, high-level PhD programs or master's programs. That's exactly what should be happening, but it needs to happen a lot faster and in a lot greater quantity, because our looming challenge to any of this and all of this is, until we have a clear and defined plan of how we're going to deliver the people challenge, nothing else works, or everything else slows down. And I suppose it really has sort of shone through in my sort of last 10 years of looking at this. 2018 to 2021, we were, I'd say, at an early stage where there wasn't a dedicated policy. And if that policy hadn't been created, would we be busy as we were? I don't know. We always work with some amazing companies, but these companies require commitment from policy. They require the assurance that if they make the investment in time, in equipment, in people, that they're effectively going to be able to capitalize on that and develop world-leading products and innovations. So having commitment in policy is critical, but having the idea that policy or government funding is the be-all and end-all is not. So if you take the view that, some of the ambitions around delivering net zero are backed by these wonderful, great strategies and great policies, but they need programs. They need dedicated programs with a timeline of activity of what is going to get funded, when it's going to get funded, and then it allows the investment community to look at this and go, that's a great idea. In fact, that's something that we want to invest in. So you will gain initial support from government to kickstart an economy like hydrogen, but ultimately then it's down to industry and the supply chain to sort of take over and then try to commercialize it. And that all along that path, you need people, you need project managers trained in this space. You need, I've mentioned the financial experts because nothing happens without the money people, does it? And I think it's recognizing that there's such a broad range and such a spectrum of people that we need. Even if we talk about going out into, just in a small region, the UK is a tiny island in comparison to the rest of the world. But if we talk about then in just Manchester terms alone, you go out into the community and you ask 9 out of 10 people, what do they know about hydrogen? Do they think is it dangerous? So all of those factors, the public acceptance needs to be a critical part of this. The public engagement is a critical part of this. So even to the very fact that when we try and do anything, and you take this back to, let's not even talk about hydrogen, let's not talk about electrification, let's just talk about, if you, over the years, you want someone to do something or come out on, or you're going out with friends, you want friends to go out on a night out with you, as an example, you almost have to some friends, you have to be that convincing voice. Come on, let's go. We'll only go out for one, or we'll only go out for two. In a way, it's probably a weird analogy, but it's kind of in a similar guise that we need to get people on side, because this isn't about forcing technology on anyone. This technology is well known and well defined to be critical to net zero ambitions globally. So why aren't we sharing not just the ambitions, but the benefits of this technology? Yes, it's going to be expensive, but yes, net zero is going to be expensive. But again, why are we heading in that direction towards net zero? Because the world's in trouble. There's more flooding. When it's too hot, our railways melt, our roads melt, parts of the world where this is affecting on a scale that we will never experience here. And it's getting worse. And I think it's recognizing that this isn't a challenge that we will solve in a tiny little place like Greater Manchester, but what we can do is try and solve our challenges, which will then expand out into and share what we've done in Greater Manchester to suppose the UK, and again, bring that learning back to Greater Manchester. And again, one of the things that has happened, especially over the last few years, is we've attracted visitors from all over the world. And we can talk about Germany, China, Japan, India. There are so many regions that have ambitions around technology like this. And we get lots of visits from parliaments, from politicians, from investors, from companies. These are global companies with a presence. Some of those have a major presence in Greater Manchester. So we bring them into the centre. And actually, what the centre has ended up becoming is that all mouthpiece for hydrogen. So at the core of it, we do research. That's fundamentally what the centre was developed to do. But what it's ended up becoming is that a place-based asset which supports policy writing, it supports the ambitions around education, it supports trade, it supports investment, it supports infrastructure. Now, I suppose my view is that everyone should have that mindset. If you have an asset which is fundamental to a technology, it should be embraced by the region, and everyone should kind of get on board and use what you have. And I think that's why when you look at the way policies in many countries are developed, it's not just government officials that write policies. What they tend to do is they bring together a group of experts from across a country who are from industry, from devolved regions like ourselves, or from the education sector, and that's the higher education and the further education sector, to come together to kind of guide how they should write a strategy around a specific technology or what will be required to deliver the ambitions of that technology. I suppose that's a kind of good and quite a long answer to your question, but it's still not finished. I mean, the ambitions of that hydrogen strategy and the hydrogen innovation initiative, which is a fantastic piece of work, they quite clearly and very, very well articulate that come 2050, this is an $8 trillion market. Technology alone is $1 trillion. Right now, global pipeline for hydrogen projects alone, and this is from the Hydrogen Council, which has got every single CEO of every single global corporation that you can think of sat on it, is about $570 billion, which sounds fantastic. And these are huge numbers, but we have to realize all of this. And we have to get on with putting things in the ground, training the people, making sure that the innovation opportunity doesn't pass us by, or the deployment opportunity doesn't pass us by.
And I think one thing that I want to pick out of what you've just mentioned is the importance of having that pathway for building those skill pathways for people that are within the sector, for the educators, like you said, to be able to, train them. I obviously know that you've been involved in a lot of reports and strategies and ambitions. Obviously, one big one being the Greater Manchester Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Strategy. And a lot of the focus that you put on that in terms of the recommendations is around skills, and specifically on reskilling and supporting educational institutions. So what I'd like for you to say is, kind of in your own words, what do you think we need to do on a regional and national scale to address that skills gap within the green energy sector?
I mean, I'll start with, you take the opportunity around skills. Skills should not be owned by anyone. They should be developed by everyone. And everyone should the shared challenge of multiple industries and multiple academic institutions, FE colleges, is one and the same, that we have a huge skills challenge across many, many sectors, retrofit, digital, net zero, and hydrogen. Like, we'll talk about hydrogen. And I think the idea behind me getting involved with a lot of that was, because it started from the fact that, we'd set up a schools program, and actually just seeing people learn from that was an amazing experience. And that kind of led to working more on trying to develop the opportunity for net zero skills or zero carbon skills. So I also sit on a board of Manchester City Council, which has a zero carbon skills group. I work with the Combined Authorities skills team. But wider than that, one thing I realized within that was there's many, many people and many, many reports that have come out in the last 2 years alone on skills, many of which say one and the same thing. We have a problem with skills across sectors like this, or specifically around green or net zero, whatever you want to call it. Then if we look at just our region, there was many organizations, the Northwest in general, or the North in general, was doing quite a lot around skills. But again, there was a lot of replication. So my first point when we started to talk about this was skills should be developed by everyone. And there's no point redoing a report that says we have a problem with skills. We need to create some tangibles that tell us how we deliver on those challenges. Now, a big industrial consortium, as an example, is Net Zero Northwest, a brilliant organization. It brings together lots of big industrial companies, and that's part of that ambition is a big hydrogen pipeline, HyNet. There's other organizations, oil and gas sector, there's cement, there's glass, there's lots of them. Their focus was, again, not just to become an industrial cluster, but an industrial cluster that would deliver lots of new opportunities for new jobs, or look at how we retrain existing jobs to work in more of a greener net zero society. So what I effectively supported them with colleagues, with a number of other colleagues from across the university and across the region, was let's bring together the industrial organisations with the combined authorities. In this instance, it was Greater Manchester Combined Authority, the Liverpool City region, and Cheshire West. So it was like, we're all trying to do something around skills. And then it was, let's bring together, some other localized organizations like the likes of Electrification Northwest and others, to see how we could all kind of get together. And actually, what I want to hear from is the HR directors or their CEOs to say, you tell us what that skills challenge is that you face. What do you need to happen for us to accelerate all of this activity? And I'd say the consensus was basically the same. It's everything we talk about on a daily basis, that you need commitment from policymakers, you need more support in terms of funding. The funding opportunities generally, because you look at how many business functions a big industrial organization has, and what has tended to happen over the years is tended to be one business function that is trying to address net zero. Might be legal compliance as an example. because at some point we need to be compliant with new regulation that is going to come out. So we need to ensure we fully understand net zero. But that's not the only business function in reality that looks at net zero or sustainability. And and you've seen the evolution of the chief sustainability officer role, which has been created in many, many organizations now, which I think is a brilliant thing, and we need lots more of it. So the idea behind that skills work was, yes, continue to support localized skills ambitions around green or net zero, but let's try and bring together a supply chain of people with the same challenge. And what we produced was effectively a mind grab, which then translated into a report that said, this is where all the skills, or this is where we perceive lots of the skills opportunities, not just opportunities, but the blockers that exist. This is where we see a lot of our challenges. And I can tell you now, it cuts across so many sectors. Digital, there's a massive crossover between digital and net zero. There's a massive crossover between many, many sectors. And what it did do is it kind of created the idea that we should create a Northwest-based skills charter. Now, again, being supported by one of the key organisations involved with Net Zero Northwest is the Northwest Business Leadership Team, who are a brilliant organisation, again, in the sense that they have dedicated skills group, and they really drove forward with that recommendation and created a brilliant skills charter, which we contributed to, as did the University of Chester and as did other industrial organisations. And it's out there, and it really says one thing: let's support everyone with trying to understand what net zero is. We'll call that net zero literacy as an example. It's a term we've kind of developed. The core basis of that very word or line is, let's provide everyone with an understanding of what net zero is, so they can invest in it, deliver it, or take it into their everyday job. Then it's about looking at the increase in jobs that will happen as a result of the strive towards net zero. You can then break that up into sort of which technologies will apply. So obviously, you know me, I'm a big supporter of hydrogen, and I talk about hydrogen all the time, hence the Mr. Hydrogen term. But I think it allows you to then really understand the scale of the challenge. So we have all of these projects across multiple technologies which have financial investment. They've had the investment decision. They are at that point where, where the construction will happen, of engineering design is happening. The big, a huge and astronomical, there's 3 words I've used there, challenge that we will land on the UK, which is a tiny island in comparison to the rest of the world, around trying to make all of these people just magically appear, is scary, because we'll have the infrastructure, or we'll have the ambition to create infrastructure or the ambition to innovate, but we won't have people to do it. And, again, it's then looking at the transferable skills. So lots of hydrogen skills can come from the oil and gas sector. One of the biggest funders right now in the hydrogen industry globally is probably the oil and gas sector. And looking at lots of transferable skills. But again, looking at me, I work at a university. The university has operated, and not just our university, but universities all over the world. If you look at the engineering disciplines around process, mechanical, electrical, those are critical for hydrogen supply chain. There just needs to be a uplift to make those courses perfectly suitable. Because then if you go and talk to industry, and remember we started this by speaking to industry tell you that in some guises they recruit people and then have to spend time, quite a lot, lengthy time, training them fit for purpose for emerging technologies like this. They've got the right sort of training in that side of things. But then let's flip this completely and look at, I'm a big company and I've developed a hydrogen fuel cell system as an example. That doesn't necessarily require someone who has a master's or a PhD. It requires somebody with the fundamental knowledge which they can get because I've made it. I've almost provided them the kind of roadmap, but they need fundamental understanding of hydrogen. They need fundamental understanding around the safety considerations. They need fundamental understanding of technology like fuel cells, so they can look at a schematic and be able to install it. Or if I'm a city region, like Greater Manchester, and say that I want to deploy lots of this technology in multiple different guises, then I won't do that until I can guarantee that someone can service it. So if I even look at hydrogen buses, or I look at hydrogen freight transport, can I make the investment in those technologies until I can guarantee that I have the people on the ground to service them or operate them or make sure that we've addressed all the safety considerations? It's so complex. If you look at hydrogen as a word, in some ways hydrogen's problem is it has an image problem or a perceived image problem. So if I all of a sudden call hydrogen green gas, has that gone away because I called it green and called it gas? Or, do you know what I mean? But I think it's understanding where are the benefits of this. Let's break it down. Where are the benefits of technology like this? Well, the benefits are clear in the fact that we have to decarbonize industry at such a large scale. We have to decarbonize transport at such a large scale. And again, that's two of Greater Manchester's biggest challenges. It's transport and gas. That's effectively, so it's the market that it applies to. And bringing this back to, what you can do to support the transition for a lot of these HR directors and lots of these CEOs, some of the learning and some of the skills challenge actually lives with them. So those people in a senior position, do they fully understand net zero? Or do they fully understand these technologies? So how can you invest, whether in people or infrastructure or skills, if you don't understand it? What you will tend to do is do what you know. And bringing this outside of the net zero sustainability hydrogen bubble that we're kind of in and talking about, just bring it down to consumer choices that we make as everyday people. If you don't know something, will you buy it? Or if you don't know that this is going to do, or you have a perception, even food as an example. So I have a very, very simple palate. I love Nando's. That's my go-to place, and I'll try and find chicken everywhere I go. And I'm not the most adventurous when it comes to food, but if someone talks to me about it, or someone gets me to, or convinces me that I should try different things, 9 times out of 10 I like it. There's that 1% where maybe food's the wrong choice because it's people's own preference. But where I wanted sort of to take this was look at the way the world is changing. So if we look at electric vehicles as an example, does that mean, if you forward think what that actually might mean, does that mean the driving test will eventually change? Because all electric vehicles are effectively automatic. So will there be a need to have manual driving tests? Because every single car potentially is going to be automatic. And, do we factor in, just that very thought process of, this is a whole new sector to a degree, right? The caveat to that is it's not really new technology. Hydrogen is hydrogen. The 75% of the universe is hydrogen. We just need to make hydrogen in a much more sustainable way. That's our challenge number one. There's 100 million metric tons of the stuff that is used in multiple industrial processes already. The very, very well-known industries already know how to use hydrogen, how to handle it, how to store it, but it's not mainstream. The whole challenge around hydrogen is your supply challenge. That's fundamental challenge number one, in the fact that we need to produce lots more hydrogen in a low carbon or green way. Ultimately, everything wants to be green, but we won't get there in day one. So it's building that economy up that then matches those policy ambitions. The policy ambitions the UK has, saying the hydrogen economy starts in the early 2020s, builds out to 2030. Then from 2030 to 2050, it's just moving at a real rate of knots. And 2050 onwards, it's just trillions and trillions of dollars.
Okay, so thank you for that. So we're going to move on to a little bit of a fun game as a way of debunking some of these green energy myths that exist within the industry. So what we're going to be doing is I'll be saying a bit of a commonly misunderstood statement to Amer, and then we'll be talking a little bit about what it is and hopefully debunking it. So are you ready for the statement, Amer?
Go for it.
So the statement is, there are certain sectors that cannot be electrified. Is it fact or fiction?
It's absolute fact.
Absolutely. So I feel like rather than me explaining it, do you think you'd be able to explain that a little bit?
Yeah, and actually, I can explain it, but I don't actually apply it to sort of people's real world understanding. So I think electrification is brilliant, and as we move towards net zero, electrification is going to be sort of critical. And we need lots more people in that sector as well to be trained, and we need lots more infrastructure. But there's some things that we just can't electrify. And actually, we touched upon this earlier. The implications of electrifying everything, if we set that as a statement, the implications of electrifying everything is what's the challenges? So everything has to be challenge-based, doesn't it? So the big challenge we have in the UK already, and is well known and well documented, is that there is limited, well, I won't say limited, but in some parts of the country, people struggle to get connection to the grid. In some areas, it can take up to 5 years. There's a huge backlog of people trying to connect big EV charging points or big electrical infrastructure. Okay, even if we solve that, there are certain things that don't make sense to be electrified. So my key area, and I suppose the way to get funding for hydrogen project in the UK, what's your primary driver for something like that? Your primary driver has to be industry. So those heavy industry who have furnaces that burn at 1,000 degrees, 3,000 degrees, you tell me how you electrify a furnace like that. And these are huge manufacturing plants. Look at for an alternative to oil or an alternative to gas. It can't directly electrify some of those processes. And actually, the very cost of it would be probably even scarier. If you look at the rail network, we'll use another example there. Are you telling me that every single rail line in the UK is electrified? It's not. And we've electrified a lot, but there's still a lot of lines, networks to electrify, but it's too expensive. So there has to be an alternative. Now, again, the opportunity for hydrogen fuel cell trains is quite clear. So my view is hydrogen's role is a clear winner for industry who's trying to decarbonate. It's a clear winner for freight transport. It's potentially an opportunity for buses as well. But the reason why I mentioned freight and buses is because those are heavy vehicles. So if I know we work on fuel cells, I can hold a 50 kilowatt fuel cell probably in my hand like that. A 50 kilowatt battery is huge. You know, a 50 kilowatt battery is not just huge, but it's heavy. Now, imagine a battery, sizable battery in a truck. These exist and they're on our roads today. There's a lot of these battery electric trucks in Manchester and buses, obviously. There's not the understanding out there that people need to recognise that sometimes the battery alone on these big trucks can weigh up to 15 tons. You factor in a payload of a vehicle, which is a truck, which has got a big payload to it, or you factor in the weight of the actual vehicle overall, that might be 20 tons, for limited range. Even if we get past the range sort of challenge, and then the length of time that needs to be on charge, are the roads built in a way that they can take every single vehicle or every single freight vehicle to be that heavy? They weren't. Were car parks built to hold that much weight if every single car was electric within it? Taking a complete step back and having that view, okay, let's look at something like hydrogen. Let's find its uses. Yes, obviously, there's lots of opportunities for transport. It all boils down to whichever technology you are looking at, it boils down to the fact that we need to install infrastructure. We need to build infrastructure. We need to start putting things in the ground. So one of the best projects, and again, I'll say this because I'm from the Northwest, I think HyNet's a brilliant project. And I think HyNet on paper dwarfs a lot of other projects. And HyNet actually can deliver a lot of the UK's hydrogen ambition, but we haven't put anything in the ground. And that's what needs to happen, because every single one of those off-takers that wants to take hydrogen from just HyNet is crying out for it. And there needs to be like a real push and an urgent push to start putting things in the ground. Because one thing you will hear, and you've heard a lot of this, and I've heard a lot of this for many, many years, it's chicken and egg. It's chicken and I'm sick to death of the chicken and the egg, because the risk that we've got is, and I've said this a few times now, and I can't believe there's no chicken, there's no egg, because we've missed the opportunity and we carry on. The easiest thing to do is forget hydrogen, forget electrification, let's carry on as we are. Petrol works great, gas works great, let's carry on. But why aren't we? Because we know that sustainability and net zero is critical. It's critical for our lives. There's parts of the region or parts of the UK that you can go and drive around where air quality has been illegal for years, and we've just let that pass. Let's put this in another mindset. So imagine you owned a house. You're about to put that house on the market, but legislation changes saying that you have to showcase what the air quality is like outside your house. To the consumer and like everyday people, that might equate to them smoking 60 cigarettes a day. Are you going to move there? Is someone going to buy your house? Do you know what I mean? It's putting it into a different sort of context. We're doing this because we have to. We have ruined the planet, and I mean, it sounds a bit, like we have ruined the planet, but we have, but it's because it was the norm, and lots of these things work brilliantly. Like the oil and gas industry has been booming for many, many years, but again, there's a reason why now the oil and gas sector recognise that hydrogen is becoming more and more the clear and obvious choice for certain sectors. So big infrastructure projects are underway, big ambitions are underway, but the consumer acceptance piece is still a key issue because it can stop projects. If you don't engage with the public on any new technology, you've got a challenge. And especially when people start Googling things and start coming up with hydrogen, and this always gets mentioned, the airship, the Hindenburg. People talk about the Hindenburg, but what you don't know is, if you do your research a little bit properly, it was back then, but a buildup of any gas is bad, right? So hydrogen is contained very, very safely, and there's millions of examples globally where hydrogen is used safely. Even in the UK, there's lots of hydrogen buses in Liverpool, London, Birmingham, eventually Manchester, that have done millions and millions of miles quite safely. And it's just making sure that people understand what it is, because a lot of the component parts for electric vehicles and hydrogen fuel cell vehicles are exactly the same. The battery gets displaced by a fuel cell, and then you add a hydrogen tank, which sounds simple enough. But again, other than that, a lot of the component parts are exactly the same. And every single vehicle manufacturer, whether they say it or not, is working on both powertrains. So I think it's not a case of one or the other. It's a case of petrol and diesel kind of been living together for years. It'll be electric versus hydrogen fuel cell electric, or hydrogen and fuel cell electric. But again, it's in its infancy because there isn't any infrastructure. So it's back to that silly chicken and that silly egg scenario where we just need to kind of get on with things. But again, going and asking consumers, what do you know about hydrogen? And from a generation, they'll say, oh, it's Hindenburg. But what we know now is that ship was painted in what is now known as effectively rocket fuel, as a buildup of gas, as an explosion. Modern day, what you should be doing is look at how some of the world's biggest companies have all got together, or even as an example, Toyota have set a petrol car on fire, they set a hydrogen car on fire, they set a battery electric car on fire. And it sounds a bit extreme, but it was there to prove a point. So when battery electric vehicles are on fire, they can be on fire for days. When petrol cars are on fire, there's an explosion. With the way these hydrogen tanks are constructed, A, they're very, very, very strong, right? But B, I could have a hydrogen canister here and I could try and ignite a flame. But because it's so light and it would escape so quickly, I wouldn't be able to do it. So what happened in that hydrogen vehicle is you just saw a big shooting up of air, which was obviously hydrogen, and it just kind of shut off. But if there's a buildup of gas, there's a buildup of gas anywhere. We have methane in our homes, but we just call it natural gas. Think of it that way. And, steam methane reforming can produce hydrogen. So I just would map it back. And, in conclusion, I'd say what I'd do is get people to understand that hydrogen's we're not just talking about a gas, we're talking about how we produce it. We're talking about how we move it. We're talking about how we store it. We're talking about transport. We're talking about non-transport. We're talking about a complete suite of safety services that need to be developed. But it all boils back down to the agenda, which I think is really close to my heart and yours, in the fact that if we don't have people to do all of this, none of it works. Because we're not trying to just service it, we're trying to develop it, we're trying to deploy it. Just service, deployment, and acceptance. If we work on those three challenges and we accelerate that, I think we've won. But I think it is really a case of ensure people understand net zero, ensure people understand the role of technologies like hydrogen, where they will play a major role, and why are they really required. And just summarize it and conclude it with, if we don't do this, look what's really going to happen. We continue to increase the temperature of the world, and that's going to lead to more floods and more flooding. It leads to poor air quality, There's a million reasons. We know this because that's the whole point in things like the Conference of Parties, and their commitment that all these world leaders got together and said, we will limit to 1.5 degrees. But we've just got to get on with it, because otherwise we haven't got hope. We haven't got hope to kind of get there in the time frame we need to get there in.
Well, thank you so much for all of that. So our business's catch line is obviously to connect the supply, following on from what you were saying of how we do need to be connecting these dots between all of the different stakeholders involved. So as part of that, and what we do on this podcast is I will ask you a question from a previous guest, and then you will give one for the next guest. So the question that you've been asked is, how does your personal life intersect with the green energy sector?
Very, very good question. Well, I think my personal life is my personal life and my professional life do cross over quite a lot. So I do talk about hydrogen a lot. In fact, even when I'm supposed to be on holiday, I end up talking about it. I've brought up conversations when I've been out with friends around technology, and then that's translated into them, some of those people coming into the university and coming to learn more about the tech. Some of these are big, they might be big industrial leaders, but on the very basic element, when I first got involved with sustainability, I didn't get it. It sounds a bit harsh, but I didn't really care. It was a job. And I think the last 10, 12 years have really kind of got me more embraced in it. So yes, I was born petrol. Well, I was born. No one's born on bike, but I was a petrol head. I used to love my sports cars and I used to love all of those kind of things. And I now drive an electric car. So I'd say that's a conscious decision I made, around not just sustainability, but because it made sense for what I did. I'd love a hydrogen fuel cell car, but I can't refuel it yet. So that's something we need to work on. So I think the crossover is what I do in my job. I'd say my primary function is to get people to understand the role of technologies like this. And I play that same role in my personal life. I try and get people to understand the role of technologies like hydrogen, the opportunities around hydrogen, but ultimately, why are we focused on ambitions like net zero? And what does sustainability mean in general? So there is a massive crossover, because you've got to live it and breathe it, haven't you? You've got to be a mouthpiece at all times. And I think that the criticism of all of that is, sometimes when you're supposed to be on holiday and you do relax, you do end up doing things like talking about net zero and hydrogen. So I am going on holiday soon where I've been banned by my family to not talk about net zero and not talk about hydrogen. So we'll see how we go.
Fantastic. Well, good luck with that.
Thank you.
Well, that brings us to the end of the episode. But honestly, it's been so fantastic having you on, Amer, and hearing everything that you've been involved with. You clearly are such an influential person within this sector. So it's great to have you on. And thank you very much.
Not a problem. It's been an absolute pleasure, Lizzie. And obviously I look forward to working with you a lot more in Hydrogen Safe.
Thank you so much for listening to The Challenge with Green Energy, brought to you by Hydrogen Safe. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, like, and leave a review. Every time you do, it helps us to promote our podcasts and increases the chances of others finding the show too. For further details on Hydrogen Safe and how we are connecting the supply between businesses, individuals, and educators through our specialist hydrogen safety training, then head over to hydrogensafe.org and subscribe to our newsletter. See you next time.